So we will start with the research problem. So this is maybe one of the first things that you can do. Think about what is the research problem that you want to address, and then ask or go through these 3 steps. Like first, identify if your research of the objective does not harm anyone. The good news, I think, that in 98% of the cases in business administration, we don't, there is not a lot of possibilities or risk of harming others with the research that we are doing. It's not like if we are experimenting with a virus or something like that. I think in biology, this is kind of more relevant, but still be careful. Make sure that you can defend your claims in your research problem, like the assumptions that you are making of the problem. Be sure that you are comfortable with that and that you are comfortable when you talk about it, right? So it is that's something important. And to do that, make sure that you include all the related research in the area that you want to talk about, because it will also gives you like security. Like if you know a lot about the theory, you will be able to communicate it better, but also it will help you to not make false claims when you are doing your research. So that's something important. Also, make sure that you're not copying from previous research. Like that's another thing. That's why the literature review is so important in here, because then you are not doing exactly the same thing that someone already did and claiming that it's new. And also make sure that you kind of summarize it in your own words, because it's also important that you are in there. Like it's not only you reporting what other people have been doing. Then also justify if you want to replicate a study. It is also possible to do it, but make sure that if your research problem guides you to replicate something, that you are able to justify it. Sometimes I think that it's difficult and it's a bit complicated to try to replicate something. I think, again, this is more like in the domain of biology and medicine when they want to repeat it in a different population. But I think in business administration, you have to add something more. It's not good enough to only replicate something, but find a new perspective, add a new variable, add something more, not only replicate, right? So make sure that your research problem doesn't include an ethical issue. And you can do it by including these 3 things. Then let's move to the research question. And in the research question, it's a bit similar to the research problem, but in the research question, make sure that your research question does not put people into risk. Like, for example, if you are going to talk about fraud, for example, try to not kind of build your question kind of punishing or claiming that someone is kind of a criminal, or I don't know, like someone is the bad person in your story. Like try to not have a question who wants to address that. It's not like you are a cop or that you are an investigator who wants to find like a crime or something. That's not a good research question. It's not research, that's like detective work. So try to not do that. Also, and here is also very important, when you have sorted out your research question, it is possible that your research question might require ethical approval. It is like if you are studying, for example, like children, for example, like if that's the good thing about business administration. We don't deal with these sensitive things, but maybe you are or studying children. So if that is the case, then you need to have ethical approval. So in that case, I recommend you to talk with your supervisor in your thesis if approval is required. Like if you're not sure, better check. I think that this also depends on the legal frameworks in every country, so make sure that you understand it. But the best way to solve this is literally talk with your supervisor. Then we move to the research design. And it's also related to the research question, but it is actually about what are you going to do, right? Like make sure that the activities that you are going to do don't put you in a risk and related to ethical issues. So if there is a risk, but again, I think in business administration, there is not a lot of risk, but if there is a risk, is it worth taking the risk? So if you are going to study the Italian mafia, reflect, is it really worth studying the Italian mafia? And maybe it's not. So do that reflection. Is it worth getting that risk? Then explain how do you want, how did you get, okay, so an important thing, if we go back to the idea of being transparent from an ethical perspective, a good strategy to show that your research design doesn't have any ethical issues is by explaining very clearly how did you get access to your participants. Like mention that it wasn't like you pay them or something, or that they were forced to do it. Explain how did you identify the population, if it is quantitative, or your case if it is qualitative. How did you do the interviews, all of these kind of things. And then also state how did you get consent from the participants, because that's also something very relevant. You should also check this with your supervisor, but make sure that you get their consent, that they say, yes, I want to participate. And one strategy to do that is to have this consent form that you can ask them to sign it when they read all of these things and they say, yes, I agree to participate. Or you can tell them this in the interview, and it's okay if you record them, and that's fine. But again, this is something that you should check with your supervisor, like the degree of consent that you require and how are you going to get it. But this is a good example. It's very, how can I say it, basic. It is in a written form, so it works well. It's actually from the UK, but anyway, check with your supervisor. And in the next video, we will dig in other aspects of your research plan and ethical issues.